The test begins. The Galactic Council chamber was alive with noise as hundreds of alien delegates gathered to witness a spectacle that had become tradition across the stars. Once every cycle, a new species was placed into the survival trial, AI-enhanced test meant to classify their true standing in the galactic hierarchy. For centuries, the system had been simple. Planets were ranked from level 1 to level 100 based on their danger. Level 1 worlds were soft gardens where life thrived without struggle, while level 100 worlds were nightmares where only the strongest and most ruthless survived. No species from a level 100 planet had ever joined the Council because such creatures were considered too wild to be controlled. The Council believed they already knew where humans belonged. Earth was listed in their archives as a calm level 1 world. Nothing but blue oceans, green forests, and small, harmless predators. To them, humans were fragile and harmless creatures, who had stumbled their way into space by luck and stubbornness. Today would be the final proof. In the center of the chamber, the great arena shimmered to life. Projectors created an artificial environment filled with dangers drawn from dozens of worlds. This was the test arena, a place where young members of a species would be released and observed while the Council judged their ability to survive. It was not meant to kill, but to push limits until weakness was exposed. Thousands of alien eyes turned toward the small figure waiting by the gate. He was a human no older than 25, chosen at random from the Terran delegation. His name was Daniel, though to most watching he was simply the human. The crowd laughed as he stepped forward. His frame was lean but not bulky. His skin showed no scales or armor, and he carried no weapons. Compared to the towering insectoids with their claws or the scaled warriors with natural plates of bone, Daniel looked almost pathetic. Voices carried across the chamber in dozens of alien tongues, mocking, questioning why such a soft being would even bother. Some said it was cruel to put him in at all, like throwing a hatchling into a den of predators. Others chuckled and wagered how many minutes he would last. The Overseer, a tall, crystalline being who ruled over the proceedings, raised his hand for silence and declared that the test would begin. The arena shifted around Daniel as gates opened, and the environment took shape. The first challenge was a jungle drawn from a level 50 world, thick with vines, insects, and unstable ground. Hidden within were predators bred for speed and ambush. The crowd cheered as the first beast, a striped quadruped with curved fangs, slipped from the foliage and stalked the human. Daniel did not scream or run as many expected. He crouched low, scanning the ground and picking up a jagged stone. His heart raced, but his mind was steady. He had grown up on Earth where danger came not only from wild animals but from storms, mountains, and the endless need to adapt. He remembered hiking through forests back home, how silence could mean danger, how every movement had to be read like a story written on the ground. The beast lunged. Daniel rolled aside, the claws missing his chest by inches. The audience gasped as he came up with the stone still in hand and slammed it into the creature's sensitive eye. It roared in pain and pulled back, thrashing into the underbrush. Daniel did not chase. He moved quickly to higher ground, using branches to climb and position himself above the danger. He had no armor, no weapon, but wit and instinct, and yet he remained alive. Already the laughter had grown softer in the chamber. The Overseer leaned forward, faceted eyes glinting with curiosity. As Daniel moved deeper into the jungle, the challenges mounted. Swarms of biting insects forced him to cover himself in mud. Unstable vines threatened to drop him into pits of spikes, but he tested each step with patience learned from crossing rivers in his youth. Each trial was faced not with strength of body but strength of mind. Where others would panic, Daniel adapted. Where others would rely on tools, he used whatever was at hand. Slowly, the crowd's amusement began to shift to unease. This was supposed to be entertainment, a show of superiority over a primitive newcomer. But what they saw instead was persistence. Hours passed within the simulated world, and still Daniel endured. His body ached and sweat rolled down his skin, yet his eyes remained sharp. The predators learned to avoid him, realizing this prey did not die as easily as others. By the time the environment shifted toward the next phase, silence had fallen across much of the chamber. The Overseer announced the human had completed the first stage. a feat considered remarkable even for level 20 species. The alien delegates stared at one another, the laughter gone, replaced with a faint stir of unease. Daniel stood at the edge of a clearing, staring at the sky projected above him. He did not know what new trial would come next, but deep inside, he felt the same stubborn fire that carried his kind through ice ages and endless wars. The council believed him weak. They believed his world gentle. But as he clenched his fists and took his next step, the arena shifted again, and the story of level 1 versus level 100 truly began. Alien laughter turns to silence. The arena transformed as Daniel took his cautious step forward. The lush jungle shimmered and dissolved into a barren wasteland of stone and sand. Jagged cliffs rose around him, and the air shimmered with heat so intense that even the alien spectators winced. This stage was not designed for comfort or balance. It was modeled after a level 60 world where survival was nearly impossible without technology. Great fissures split the ground, and rivers of molten rock glowed faintly below. At the far end of the arena, a massive shape stirred, and the crowd leaned forward in anticipation. Out of the smoke lumbered a creature that towered over Daniel, its hide thick and armored, its breath steaming in the sweltering heat. It was a beast bred in the council's laboratories, designed to crush challengers and force surrender. Most species at this level would not last 5 minutes. The aliens erupted in laughter once again as they saw the human standing small and defenseless against the monster. Some jeered, betting on whether he would die in one blow or two. Yet Daniel's face did not twist into fear. His eyes darted around the environment, noting every rock, every slope, every chance for movement. He remembered the deserts of Earth, the burning sun, the way survival was not about strength alone but about using the land itself as a weapon. He did not run blindly at the beast nor collapse in despair. He moved with patience, circling, waiting for it to commit to its first strike. When the monster charged, the ground shook like thunder. Dust and rock flew into the air, but Daniel sprinted, aside, drawing on the speed that came from years of running across rough trails back home. The beast's claws gouged deep trenches into the stone, but Daniel was already climbing higher ground, pulling himself up a jagged cliffside. The crowd hissed in surprise, watching this fragile being not crumble but adapt. With each movement he showed balance and cunning that seemed out of place for one who should have been weak. The beast roared and came again, smashing into the cliff. The rock quivered and Daniel almost lost his grip, but he remembered the old lessons his father once told him while hiking. Always find 3 points of contact, never trust the surface beneath you. He held firm, then pushed upward, dragging himself onto a ledge. From here he could see the beast's weak points, not its armored hide, but its softer underbelly when it reared back to strike. He scooped up a sharp stone, testing the weight in his hand. It was no sword, no plasma weapon, yet in his grip it became a tool of survival. With a deep breath, Daniel leapt down, rolling across the beast's back and slamming the stone into the vulnerable flesh just behind its jaw. The creature howled in pain, staggering and smashing its head into the ground. The arena trembled as the monster thrashed, but Daniel clung on, his arm steady, driving the stone again and again until the beast collapsed in silence. Dust and smoke rose, and for a long moment, no sound came from the chamber above. The delegates stared in disbelief. What they had witnessed was not luck. It was not chance. It was the deliberate survival instinct of a predator who had been underestimated. The overseer leaned forward, crystalline features shifting with unease. It had seen hundreds of trials, but never one where a so-called weak species dispatched a beast bred to crush warriors of far greater standing. Whispers filled the chamber now, sharp and tense. The laughter had died. Some asked if the simulation had malfunctioned, if the human had been given hidden weapons. Others muttered in fear, recalling old rumors about Earth's strange history. One by one, the voices grew quiet as the overseer announced that the human had passed yet another stage. The scoreboard flickered, showing survival levels climbing higher than expected, past what most thought possible. Daniel knelt in the dust, chest heaving with exhaustion, his skin coated with sweat and ash. Yet his eyes still burned with determination. He was not finished. He was not broken. He was only beginning. Far above, the delegates who once laughed now sat in silence, watching the fragile figure on the screen with a growing sense of dread. They were starting to realize that the human before them might not be a simple child of a level 1 world. He might be something far more dangerous, something forged on a planet harsher than they ever imagined. As the arena shifted once more, the air cooling into the darkness of a swamp filled with unseen dangers, Daniel rose to his feet. He thought of home, of storms that tore down trees, of predators that stalked in silence, of winters that froze the land and demanded resilience. To him, this was not new. It was simply another challenge, another chance to endure. The audience leaned in, silent now, no longer amused but waiting with anxious eyes. The test was far from over, but already the galaxy was beginning to learn the truth. This was not a fragile creature from a gentle world. This was a survivor from a death world in disguise, and he was only warming up secrets of a death world upbringing. The swamp around Daniel was alive with sound, every ripple of water and every rustle of reeds a warning. The simulated environment had shifted again, this time into a dark wetland designed to mirror the hazards of a level 70 planet. The air was heavy with mist, the ground unstable, and unseen creatures slithered beneath the water. Most challengers from other species would fear to take even a single step, yet Daniel pressed forward with eyes sharp and senses alert. He knew instinctively that standing still was death, for on Earth he had learned long ago that nature punished hesitation. The alien spectators whispered nervously as they watched him move. They expected fear or panic, but instead they saw a man who read the world as if it were a familiar book. He tested the ground with a branch before stepping, knowing instinctively that soft mud could swallow him whole. He scanned the trees for shapes that did not belong, aware that predators were often ambush hunters waiting for a careless mistake. To the Council, this was strange, for in their minds, a level 1 being should not carry such deep survival knowledge. Yet Daniel was a child of Earth, a planet where jungles teemed with venom, oceans with lurking hunters, and skies with storms that could kill in minutes. The swamp began its assault. A serpent-like creature surged from the water, scales glistening, fangs bared. Daniel twisted aside, grabbing a broken branch and forcing it into the beast's jaws. Its weight dragged him into the muck, but he rolled, forcing the serpent into a tangle of roots where it thrashed and wrapped itself tight until it could no longer strike. The crowd gasped, not only at his survival but at the way he used the environment itself as a weapon. He was not fighting with brute force. He was thinking, adapting, and remembering lessons carved into his bloodline through millennia of struggles. He pulled himself free. Memories flashed across his mind. He remembered being a boy in the forests of Earth, watching his father show him how to build a shelter out of nothing but branches and leaves. He remembered his mother teaching him how to read the weather and the shifting of clouds, how to tell if a storm was minutes away by the change in the air. He remembered long nights under open skies where predators prowled nearby, and how every sound, every shadow could mean survival or death. The aliens had believed Earth to be calm, yet for humanity danger was never far away. Even with technology, humans knew the raw force of their world could not be ignored. Floods destroyed towns, earthquakes split the ground, diseases swept through cities. To survive was not simply instinct but a way of life. The Council scientists began pulling records, their claws and tentacles trembling as they scanned Earth's archives. They found reports of volcanic eruptions that had wiped out entire regions, of hurricanes that reached winds strong enough to tear steel from concrete, of animals with venom lethal in a single bite, of wars that had shaped civilizations through endless cycles of destruction and rebirth. As the data poured in, realization spread like fire. Earth could not possibly be a level 1 world. It had been misclassified or perhaps intentionally hidden. Every sign pointed to something far higher, something terrifying. The murmurs in the chamber grew more urgent, but no one dared speak it aloud just yet. Meanwhile, Daniel moved deeper into the swamp where the ground became less stable. The water rose higher, and soon he was wading waist deep. Shapes swam around him, their movements predatory, their eyes glowing beneath the murk. He stilled his breath, knowing that splashing would draw them closer. Instead, he moved slow and steady, every motion deliberate, like stalking prey in the forests of his youth. One of the creatures lunged, jaws snapping, but Daniel grabbed the side of its head and forced it against a submerged tree trunk until it stilled. He pushed onward, each act a testament to resilience that could not be faked. Above him, the delegates could no longer laugh. They watched with a silence born of dread, their minds struggling to reconcile the image before them with the fragile species they had once dismissed. The overseer itself shifted in unease, crystalline facets reflecting the dim light. The data streams confirmed what the eyes already suspected. Humans were not soft. Humans were not weak. They were children of chaos, born from a planet that tested them every day in ways no council world ever could. What the aliens called training, humans called childhood. What the aliens called survival trials, humans called living. Daniel finally reached higher ground where the swamp opened into a misty clearing. His chest heaved from the effort, but he still stood. He wiped the mud from his face, eyes burning with that same unyielding fire. He did not know what the council whispered above or what records they uncovered. All he knew was that he had survived yet another stage, not by luck, but by skill and instinct honed over generations. The simulation had been meant to expose weakness, but instead it was revealing a truth that sent shivers across the galaxy. Humanity had been underestimated, and the realization was spreading fast. The swamp had failed to claim him, just as storms, beasts, and disasters had failed on Earth. The test was far from over, but the aliens were beginning to understand a truth that could no longer be ignored. Daniel was not the outlier. He was the example of his kind, a Deathworlder in every sense, a level 100 survivor hidden in plain sight, the first blood. The swamp faded into nothingness as the arena reshaped itself once again. Towers of stone rose high into the air, the ground hardened into rough red earth, and the sound of a low growl echoed across the chamber. This stage was different from the others. It was not about storms or terrain or the patience of endurance. This was the combat stage, where the challenger faced a living beast bred for destruction. The alien audience leaned forward, eyes wide and unblinking, for this was the moment most waited for. Here, fragile species were torn apart. Here, warriors proved their worth. And here, according to their expectations, the human would finally meet. His end, Daniel stood in the center of the arena, chest rising and falling with steady breaths. He had no weapon but his hands and whatever he could find on the ground. He turned slowly, scanning the horizon, waiting for the enemy to show itself. The growl came again, louder now, vibrating through the ground. From a cave in the cliffs emerged the beast. It was massive, easily 3 times his height, its body covered in thick armored scales that shimmered under the arena light. 4 eyes glowed with hunger, and twin tusks curved outward from a mouth dripping with saliva. This was no simple predator. It had been bred for combat, trained to fight, and unleashed only when the council wanted blood. The delegates laughed again at the sight, not because they thought the fight would be interesting, but because they thought it would be short. Some races had lost their finest warriors to that creature, yet here was a human standing with no blade or shield. Bets were whispered. Would he last a minute or two before being crushed? The overseer raised its hand. The signal, to begin, and the beast roared, charging with thunderous steps that shook the very ground. Daniel did not flinch. He watched its movements, the way its weight shifted, the rhythm of its stride. At the last possible moment, he rolled aside, feeling the hot breath of the creature as it thundered past him. Dust and rock scattered, and Daniel came up with a shard of stone in his hand, sharp and jagged. The beast wheeled around faster than expected and lunged again. Daniel darted forward instead of back, slipping under its tusk and slamming the shard into the soft skin of its throat where the scales thinned. The creature roared in pain, snapping its head violently, but Daniel was already moving, never staying still long enough to be caught. The alien audience grew silent. This was not the behavior of prey. This was the behavior of a predator that studied its foe and struck with precision. Daniel's mind raced as he remembered stories of lions on the savannah, of great bears in the mountains, of wolves hunting in packs. He remembered that survival was not about being the strongest, but about knowing when and how to strike. The beast lunged again, and Daniel leapt onto its back, clinging to the ridges of its armored hide. It bucked and twisted, slamming itself against the cliff walls to shake him off, but Daniel held firm, his arms burning with strain. He drove the shard down again and again into the softer joints between the scales until blood sprayed hot across his face. The first blood had been drawn, not from the human but from the council's prized beast. The chamber erupted in gasps and shouts. This was impossible, they cried. This was not supposed to happen. Yet the evidence was before their eyes. The human was not being slaughtered. He was winning. The overseer leaned closer, crystalline eyes flashing with something that looked like fear. The beast, enraged and bleeding, reared back for one final desperate strike. Daniel leapt clear, landing hard on the ground but rolling to his feet. The creature stumbled forward, weakened by blood loss, and Daniel took his chance. He snatched another sharp rock from the ground and hurled it with all his strength into one of its eyes. The impact made the beast stagger and collapse to the ground, its massive body shuddering once before it lay still. Silence fell across the arena. A silence so complete it seemed the galaxy itself had stopped to watch. Daniel stood there panting, body trembling with exhaustion, but alive. His chest was streaked with blood and sweat, his arms bruised, but his eyes remained fierce. He looked not like prey, but like a hunter who had proven his right to survive. Above, the delegates stared with wide eyes, their laughter gone, their wagers forgotten. For the first time, they were forced to consider the truth. This human was not an accident, not a lucky survivor. He was a reflection of something much larger and far more dangerous. Whispers spread through the chamber. Some demanded that the simulation be stopped, that no level 1 being should be capable of such feats. Others murmured that perhaps Earth was not what they thought it was. Perhaps, just perhaps, they were staring at a species born from a level 100 Deathworld. And if that were true, then every human carried within them the same terrifying potential they had just witnessed. Daniel raised his head, meeting the eyes of the overseer as if he knew the thoughts running through the minds of the council. He did not speak. He simply stood tall in the dust and blood, his silence louder than any boast. The test had meant to humiliate him, to reveal his weakness. Instead, it had revealed something far more shocking. The first blood had been spilled, and it belonged not to the human, but to the galaxy's pride. The trial was far from over, but already the balance of fear had shifted forever. Humanity revealed, the arena floor darkened once more as the corpse of the slain beast was removed and the next stage prepared. The overseer announced that the human had cleared the combat trial, its voice resonating across the chamber with an unease it could not hide. The delegates shifted in their seats, some whispering frantically, others staring down in silence. Never before had a species believed to come from a gentle world endured so long, and the truth was beginning to claw at the edges of their certainty. What if the archives were wrong? What if Earth was not a level 1 paradise, but something far more terrifying? Daniel stood in the center, breathing heavily, blood still drying on his arms and chest. He was battered, exhausted, but he refused to bend. The ground beneath his feet shimmered and changed, forming into a cracked wasteland filled with geysers of steam and pockets of acid lakes. Jagged rocks jutted like broken teeth, and above him, the simulated sky rumbled with storms. This was a level 80 environment, one designed to break even the strongest of species. Acid rain began to fall, hissing against the stone. The crowd leaned forward, waiting at last for the inevitable failure. Yet as the rain fell, Daniel simply tore strips of his own clothing and wrapped them around his arms and head, shielding his skin as best he could. He moved quickly to shelter beneath an overhang, his mind calculating, his body adjusting, as if this was simply another day of survival. In the council chamber, the scientists worked feverishly, pulling up Earth's records. The more they read, the more their confidence collapsed. They found tales of humans surviving plagues that should have wiped them out, of explorers crossing frozen tundra where temperatures plunged lower than most species could withstand, of divers plunging into the deepest oceans where pressure crushed steel. They discovered accounts of volcanoes that drowned whole continents in ash, of deserts that killed in hours without water, of storms so powerful that even advanced technology struggled to endure. They watched images of humans climbing the tallest mountains with nothing but determination, of farmers coaxing life from barren soil, of soldiers fighting wars in every kind of terrain imaginable. Earth was not gentle. Earth was a crucible. Whispers turned into heated debate. Some argued that the human must be a mutation, a rare outlier with impossible strength. Others shook their heads, pointing to the endless data that painted a picture of a world where survival itself was the greatest trial. They began to understand that humanity's resilience was not born of chance. It was the product of endless struggle, generation after generation, molded by an environment that pushed them further than most species could comprehend. The laughter that once filled the chamber had been replaced with fear. If one human could endure this, then what could billions do if provoked? Meanwhile, Daniel continued his trial. He crossed the acid wastes by watching the ground, stepping only where steam vents cooled the rock. He used shards of broken stone to test the path ahead, listening for the hollow sound of unstable earth. At one point he slipped, his foot plunging, into a pool that burned through his makeshift wrappings, yet he gritted his teeth and pulled free, refusing to let pain stop him. When the storms grew violent, he dug into the side of a cliff with his bare hands, carving out a shallow shelter, and waiting as lightning split the sky. Every move he made was one of patience and calculation. The audience began to see what they had refused to believe. This was not luck. This was instinct. As hours passed, Daniel pushed through the wasteland until the storms quieted and the acid pools gave way to open plains. He stood tall despite his wounds, his body a living testament to endurance. The overseer announced his completion of the stage, but its voice was strained, as if the words themselves carried too much weight. Around it the delegates spoke in hushed tones, each knowing what the other feared to say aloud. Earth was not a level 1 world. It was something else entirely, a place that rivaled the harshest planets in the galaxy. And if this was true, then every human was a Deathworlder in disguise. Daniel raised his head toward the chamber, though he could not see the faces above. He felt the weight of their stares, the shift in the air. He had not come here to frighten them, but he could see in their eyes that fear had already taken root. He was not the outlier they thought him to be. He was the product of a world that tested its children from birth. He was proof of humanity's nature, and the galaxy would never see his kind the same way again. As the arena began to shift toward its final stages, the silence above was heavier than any roar of laughter before. For the first time, the aliens no longer saw Daniel as prey, nor as a fragile creature playing at survival. They saw what he truly was, a child of Earth, a being forged in fire, ice, and storm. They saw the truth of humanity revealed, and it left them shaken to their core. The apex moment. The arena had grown darker, the red glow of molten rivers fading into shadows as the simulation prepared its most brutal test yet. The overseer's voice carried across the chamber, steady but heavy, declaring that the human had reached the final environment, one designed for only the strongest of known species. Few in history had ever survived what was about to come. This was the apex trial, a collapsing environment filled with multiple predators, unstable terrain, and no time to rest. It was a trial meant to end challengers quickly and decisively, proving who among the galaxy could endure the chaos of ultimate survival. The delegates whispered, some leaning forward in nervous anticipation, others shaking their heads, certain this fragile human could not possibly go further. The ground cracked beneath Daniel's feet as the simulation roared to life. Jagged cliffs crumbled into the abyss. Fiery vents spewed ash and the air thickened with toxic smoke. Out of the fissures crawled creatures unlike anything he had yet faced. Scaled beasts with hooked talons, insectoid predators that moved with terrifying speed and shadowed flyers circling overhead. The environment itself was collapsing piece by piece, leaving little ground to stand on. To most species, this was a nightmare without escape. To Daniel, it was strangely familiar, for it reminded him of Earth's endless mix of dangers where floods could come one day and firestorms the next, where predators stalked the night while the ground itself could shake and split open without warning. He crouched low, chest heaving, body aching from the trials before, but his spirit unbroken. His mind ran through options, refusing to freeze. The first predator lunged from the smoke, claws raised to tear him apart. Daniel rolled beneath it, snatching up a length of broken stone and driving it deep into the softer flesh beneath its arm. The creature screeched and fell back into the fissure below. Before he could breathe, two more leapt from opposite sides. Daniel sprinted forward, forcing them to collide with each other, then used their moment of confusion to scramble onto higher ground. His every action was instinct sharpened by desperation, not elegant but effective, the same way humans had always survived back home above. The delegates watched in silence, their eyes wide. This was not survival by chance. This was strategy, creativity, and endurance wrapped into one relentless form. They saw a being that refused to quit, even as the world collapsed around him. They saw what it meant to be human. The trial escalated. A massive winged predator descended from the sky, claws outstretched, screeching so loudly the chamber itself vibrated. Daniel grabbed a shard of rock and hurled it with all his strength, striking the creature's eye. It veered off course in pain, smashing into a cliff and tumbling down. The ground beneath Daniel cracked, splitting wide, and he barely managed to leap to solid stone before the earth gave way behind him. His body was screaming, muscles on the edge of collapse, lungs burning from the smoke. Yet his mind refused to surrender. He thought of the people back home, of his parents, of the countless humans who had endured storms, wars, and hunger. He thought of his species, and that thought alone drove him forward. One by one the predators fell. Not because he was stronger, but because he was smarter, faster, more stubborn. He tricked one beast into chasing him across an unstable ledge, leaping away at the last second as it plunged to its death. He led another into a vent of steam, its screech cut short as the scalding gas consumed it. His hands were torn and bleeding, his chest seared with burns, yet his eyes never lost their fire. The audience realized with a chill that this human was not unique. If one of his kind could do this, then every human carried that same seed of survival. At last the environment collapsed around him, cliffs tumbling, fire and smoke filling the air. Daniel stood on a final fragment of stone, bloodied but alive, chest rising and falling with ragged breath. The simulation froze, the chaos halting in an instant. Silence fell upon the chamber, heavy and absolute. The overseer rose to its full height, crystalline body reflecting fractured light, its voice cold and deliberate. The human had completed the apex trial. The council had no choice but to recognize what they had seen with their own eyes. The delegates looked at one another, their faces pale with realization. They had mocked Earth, called it Level 1, called its people weak. Now, they knew the truth. Earth was a death world, perhaps the greatest of all, and its children were survivors forged in endless fire. If one human could outlast the apex trial, then humanity as a whole was far more dangerous than anything the galaxy had yet faced. Some species trembled with fear at the thought of war with such beings. Others sat in stunned silence, unable to reconcile the image of the fragile figure below with the unstoppable truth it represented. Daniel fell to one knee, exhausted beyond measure, but he raised his head, his eyes meeting the chamber above. He did not speak, for no words were needed. His survival was his statement, his endurance the proof. He had not only passed the test but shattered the illusion the council had built around his species. Humanity was not level 1. Humanity was level 100, a Deathworlder race disguised in plain sight. And now the galaxy knew it. The legend of the Deathworlder. The arena went still, the false sky fading and the broken ground resetting into a smooth circle of stone. The simulation was over. The overseer stood motionless, its crystalline body pulsing, with refracted light as it looked down upon the human who had endured what no other outsider had survived. Daniel knelt on the floor, his body trembling with exhaustion, wounds scattered across his skin, yet his head was held high. His chest rose and fell with ragged breath, but the fire in his eyes had not dimmed. He was alive, and that was enough. The chamber of the Galactic Council was silent, so silent that the hum of machinery could be heard. The delegates who had entered the day mocking humanity now stared with unease, fear, and something far more dangerous, respect. They had watched this human endure what entire species had failed, adapt to environments that crushed others and face monsters that reduced warriors to shredded remains. They had laughed when the trial began. They were not laughing now. The overseer raised its voice, announcing formally that the human had passed all stages of the survival trial, an achievement so rare that it had only been recorded a handful of times across history. The words echoed through the hall, but the weight of them went beyond tradition. The delegates leaned into whispered arguments, their voices trembling with alarm. The archives had been wrong. Earth was not a level 1 world. The evidence was undeniable. Their records had classified a Deathworld as harmless. Humanity was not fragile. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with. Daniel rose slowly to his feet, swaying slightly, but refusing to show weakness. He looked up at the delegates, though he could not see them clearly through the glare of the chamber. Yet his stance said everything. He did not need to shout or boast. His survival was the loudest truth in the galaxy. For a long moment, no one dared speak, until one of the elder species broke the silence. The voice was filled with awe and dread, as it asked the question now burning in every mind. If one human could do this alone, what could billions of them do together? The words rippled across the chamber like a wave. Some delegates shifted nervously, others recoiled, their imaginations painting pictures of armies of Deathworlders unleashed upon the stars. Every empire present knew what it meant. They had underestimated a species that should never have been underestimated. They had laughed at humanity, called them weak, fragile, foolish. Now they saw the truth. Humans were survivors of the highest order, apex predators who carried with them the instinct to endure anything. The laughter had been replaced with fear, and fear was far more dangerous. Daniel did not speak as the overseer dismissed him from the arena, but inside he felt a weight lift from his chest. He had proven not only himself, but his people. He knew word would spread beyond this chamber, across worlds and empires, and that the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Perhaps they would fear humans, perhaps they would respect them, perhaps both. But they would no longer dismiss them. The trial had forced the galaxy to witness what it meant to be born of Earth, a world of endless danger, a world that shaped survivors into legends. As Daniel stepped out of the arena, limping but unbowed, the overseer turned to the council and declared the final verdict. Earth would be reclassified, not as a level 1 world, but as a level 100 death world. The announcement struck the chamber like thunder. Some species gasped, others hissed, but none could deny the evidence. The record was clear. Humanity belonged at the highest tier of survival. Humanity was Deathworlder. Daniel's image was broadcast to every corner of the chamber one last time. He was not a giant, not armored, not bristling with weapons. He was a battered man with blood on his skin, dirt on his hands, and fire in his eyes. Yet that image struck more fear into the galaxy than any weapon of war. The delegates knew what they had seen. They knew what it meant, and they whispered to one another the same words that would echo for centuries. Beware the Deathworlders. Daniel left the chamber quietly, but his legend had already begun. He had shown the galaxy the truth of his people, and in doing so had changed the balance of power forever. Humanity was no longer the unknown newcomer. They were the species that had survived the impossible, and their place in the stars would never again be questioned. The overseer recorded the results in the council archives, its crystalline form dimming with unease. It knew what this meant for the future. A new force had stepped into the galactic stage, one born of storms and fire, one that carried within it the will to fight, endure, and conquer. The galaxy would tremble at the thought, for a new legend had been born, and it was written in blood and survival. The human walked away, but the whispers spread. faster than light, carried by fear and awe alike. From that day on, across the vast expanse of the stars, one phrase would linger in every council chamber, every war room, and every whispered conversation. Humanity had revealed itself, and the galaxy would never forget. The Deathworlder's legacy, the council chamber remained heavy with silence long after Daniel had left the arena, and though the trial was complete, its weight pressed on every delegate. Present, the air seemed colder, and the light from the overseer's crystalline body cast sharp shadows across the walls, as if the entire galaxy itself had tilted into something new and uncertain, for what had been revealed could not be undone, nor ignored. The overseer's voice was quiet as it delivered the final judgment, the words trembling with something close to fear. Earth had been wrongly classified, it declared, and must be placed at the very highest tier, a level 100 death world, where only the most dangerous of life could thrive. This was no mere adjustment in record-keeping. It was the rewriting of truth itself, for it meant that humanity had never been fragile nor weak, but rather forged in a crucible that shaped them into survivors of unparalleled will. The delegates spoke in hushed tones, their voices full of unease. Some remembered laughing at the human when the trial began. Now they could not meet each other's eyes, for they had seen him face storms, beasts, fire and shadow, and still rise again when even their proudest warriors would have fallen in. Moments the question was not how he survived, but what his kind might do should they ever be threatened. The galaxy had always believed in strength, measured by claws, scales, or weapons, yet in Daniel, they had witnessed something different, something they had underestimated: the power to endure, to think, to adapt, and to refuse surrender. He was one man, yet in him, the truth of his entire species had been revealed. Humanity was not born in safety but in chaos, not raised in comfort but in challenge. They were children of a world that tried endlessly to break them, and instead only made them stronger. Word would travel quickly. Every empire, every warlord, every scholar would hear of the human who passed the apex trial, and whispers would turn into warnings. Beware the Deathworlders, they would say, beware those who smile while storms rage, those who rise from ruin, those who make weapons from nothing and refuse to. But when all hope is gone, the myth had already begun, and myths were often more powerful than armies. Daniel walked the long corridor beyond the chamber, each step heavy yet steady, his body broken, but his spirit unshaken. He thought of Earth, its oceans, its mountains, its deserts, and its storms. He thought of all the men and women who had endured hunger, fear, war, and disaster, and still lived to build and dream. He realized the trial had not been about him alone. It had been about showing the galaxy what humanity truly was. The Overseer wrote the final record into the Council archives, and in that moment, a shadow crossed the galaxy, not of despair, but of awakening, for every empire now knew the truth. A new force had entered the stage, a species, no longer overlooked, no longer dismissed, a people born of a death world who carried in their blood the fire to endure anything. The legend of the Deathworlder had been written not in victory speeches nor banners, but in survival, in blood, and in silence. Daniel had stood alone, yet he had carried the weight of all his kind, and his survival was their message to the stars. Humanity would not be broken. Humanity would not be forgotten. Humanity had been revealed, and the galaxy would never be the same. Again, the end.